These are notes 14.2. We're going to take a look at what Americans thought of the war in Europe and the problems in Asian countries happening at this time and what we should do about it. Now, overall, we look at Asian countries and the response that Roosevelt had against Japanese aggression. He did not like it. In fact, um, basically, as they began to do more aggression on Chinese cities and China mainland, America just told them basically to stop, but they didn't want to get involved in a world war. So it was mostly lip service that America gave that said, don't do that, we don't like that, you shouldn't be doing that. But they really didn't um, have anything to do overall as far as, you know, whether they should whether they were actually going to stop them. In fact, 3 or 4 of our sailors died in a gunboat on a Chinese river from a Japanese airplane attack, but that still really didn't um, impact Americans overall. Um, they didn't like it, but they definitely didn't want to go to war with them. If we look back at Europe, in the spring of 1939, Hitler broke the Munich Pact. The Munich Pact that said, hey, I just want the Sudetenland and I'm not going to take any more. This is all the land I'm going to take. And he began to expand further. So you can see right here, he absorbs Czechoslovakia, which is right here. These gray arrows pointing in there. Kind of this outer, it would have been down there, I believe. Um, Now, overall, um, Czech was not something people, wanted him to invade either. But it wasn't until Hitler invaded Poland that it really started World War II. Even though he had violated the Munich Pact, um, overall, France and Britain did not want to go to war. But when he invaded Poland, which was its own country, and basically took it in a very short amount of time, that's what we call the start of World War II. What actually surprised most people was the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. They agreed that they would divide Poland and not attack each other. So basically, what they would do is Russia would get Poland um, on the eastern side, and Germany would get Poland on the western side. It basically would be divided into two, and most people didn't see this as a possibility. They didn't realize that Hitler and Stalin would agree together and come up with this agreement. Now, they don't stay that way. Overall, they will eventually, the Soviets will change to the Allied side. During this time, we have the Blitzkrieg, which is the lightning war. The uses of tanks and planes was first. That was the first phase, and then behind that came the vehicles, jeeps, and infantry was the second phase. It was very effective, and Germany and Russia split Poland in half, with the Baltic states up here going to Russia. By 1939, basically September 1939, we have the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan, the allies of Britain and France. Eventually, that will include the Soviets, the United States, and China, but not right at this point. That's why it's in parentheses. In 1940, Germany took Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. This idea of blitzkrieg was huge. You can see that they go into Poland here, split it in half. You have the Soviet Union. Then they go over here up to Denmark, Norway, over to the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Now they're right here on the edge of France. France begins to fortify. If we look down here, this is kind of a blown up version of this area right there. You can see that overall in Belgium, that France had a large armored division right there. What happens is the Nazis came from behind. They never suspected the Nazis would come from here. They were sure they would come to Belgium. If we look at the Axis and Allies, you can definitely see the green is the Allies prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The blue is after. If we look at Russia, they were kind of where they started Axis, then switched to Allies. and these are the neutral countries, black being the Axis powers. France had constructed along this line here between Belgium. It was called the Maginot Line, which was fortified along the border of Belgium. Britain eventually comes through this area here, through this area here, through a forest area on the Ardennes Forest, and went north to the English Channel. During this time period, we have the miracle of Dunkirk, which is 338,000 troops escaped Britain. This is some of them awaiting evacuation to Britain. Um, Overall, the Germans move from the English Channel now that they control that area, and they came kind of behind the French lines and began to attack Paris, took Paris, and forced the French to surrender. It was a 35-day war. It's extremely quick, even for this time period. That's still really quick. You can definitely see the expansion here of the German Empire going through Belgium, the Netherlands. We're talking in a matter of a few months. Countries that were once free are now under the control of Germany. We have one holdout, the United Kingdom. So that's what Germany focuses its power upon. They don't have to worry about this Eastern Front. They're their allies right now. That will eventually change. Battle of Britain was an air battle between the Germans and the British. It was in 1940. The Germans lost 1,700 planes, and the British only 1,000 planes. But you can see where a lot of these airstrikes were. They bombed London every night. There was not any let up from the bombing. Overall, it took a toll on the English. People took shelter in subways. There's a lot of pictures depicting people having shelter in the subways. In fact, if you remember from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the children were out in the country. It was actually set in World War II during the Battle of Britain. The reason why they were out in the country, they were not in London and school, is because they were trying to escape the bombing. So a lot of people sent their children out into outskirts areas so they wouldn't be in as much danger. If we look overall, here's another better map, I would say, of the Axis powers dominating Europe. Now, overall, what happens is this line right here, the non-aggression pact, does not work out. And so they basically will advance into these areas they had previously given the Soviet Union and basically attack the Soviet Union. Once they secure France, they're going to try to knock out the Soviet Union after the Battle of Britain. What was our reaction? Well, the Nine Committee thought that big businesses put America into World War I. They reinforced the idea of isolationism. They produced pamphlets, did a lot of things that encouraged Americans to stay out of World War II. The Neutrality Act of 1939 had a cash and carry provision. It meant that the Allied countries could buy arms if they paid cash, no loans were given, and they carried them on their own ships. The idea right here, as this depicts, help the Allies win so that we wouldn't have men die. So just make it cash and carry. We're not really helping them, technically. We're just selling. It's giving them the resources. Many isolationists didn't like the Neutrality Act. They didn't like the cash and carry provision. Roosevelt argued that the United States should at least prepare for war. We should at least get ready for war, so we're ready. That doesn't mean we have to go to war, was his argument. During this time, we have the solidifying of the Axis powers, the Tripartite Pact, which was between Germany, Italy, and Japan. When that happens, America passes a peacetime draft. That means we were drafting people into the military, but we hadn't actually gone to war. FDR is elected for a third term. That had never happened before, but many people, with a lot of the things happening in the world, didn't want to take a chance of putting their faith in someone else. So he's elected a third time, and as this political cartoon is depicting, the tug of war is pretty strong overall. FDR trying to pull him into the war, and British diplomats overall, begging for us to help them. If we look at World War One cost to the United States, that's pretty high in war expenditures. If we look at the people that were killed and missing, the human cost of the war, the high rate of unemployment, these were their concerns. They didn't want to go through this again. Now, what happens overall is we have an even closer step to war with the Lend-Lease Act. Instead of cash and carry, we're actually going to loan money to the Allies. This is Britain did not have the money to pay cash, so they began to loan money to Britain primarily, and the French government that was kind of in intermission because they were controlled by the Germans at that time. $40 billion was loaned to the Allies. At the same time, kind of quietly, FDR met with Churchill um, and a boat off the coast of Britain, and they signed a document endorsing self determination. The Atlantic Charter basically said that nations should be able to determine their own governments. It spoke out against dictatorship, totalitarianism, everything that Axis powers stood for. Basically, FDR says, yeah, we agree with you intellectually, but we're not quite ready to send our men over yet. But that was getting even close. The Atlantic Charter, basically, we say we're willing to fight for democracy overall. Fall of 1941, Germany realizing that we're loaning money, we're getting very close. We're right. I don't know if they actually knew the Atlantic Charter happened because that was kind of a quiet thing, but they began to attack our ships, um, sink them, and kill over 100 soldiers. At this point, we're still not willing to go to war against Germany. We just aren't. We still believe that we can somehow stay out of the war, or at least FDR wasn't willing to put all his cards on the table. If we look at how much we loaned, there's a lot loaned not only to the British but also the Soviets. Um, and some of that happens after we enter the war, but you can see that some of it was actually loaned before this time. That's notes 14.2 leading up to 14.3 where we talk about Pearl Harbor.